This video is for teachers looking for an overview or some potential modifications of Day 15 in Unit 4 of the United States History curriculum. The focus question of this lesson is what events led to the ratification of the 19th Amendment, with the objective of students being able to sequence some of the events leading to the ratification of the 19th Amendment and identify strategies used to win the right to vote for women. If you've been following the Passport to Social Studies curriculum, this lesson might be a little different from what you and your students have seen in the past, so it is recommended that you start with this slide. As you do, explain that the activity in this lesson is going to be done primarily through DocsTeach, which is the online tool from the National Archives site. During it, students will study a series of primary sources that will give them an idea as to the length of the suffrage movement, the techniques used, and also the arguments for and against giving women the right to vote. Even though all of the documents are pre-selected and easily accessible, and you're going to see that in just a few minutes, you may want to use this as an opportunity to introduce DocsTeach to your class if they aren't already familiar with it. The National Archives online database and library is vast, and it could be cumbersome for students to locate relevant primary sources to use. DocsTeach is designed specifically for teachers and students, and while it doesn't yet include all of the documents in the whole National Archives, it does include several useful features that I'm going to highlight right now using the first document that appears in this lesson, which is the joint resolution proposing the 15th Amendment. To begin, click the menu and then Documents, and that's going to take us to the simple user interface for searching through their archive. And I'm going to type in the title of the document we're looking for. However, you could also use relevant phrases or even the creator's name, and then click Search. And in the search results, you can see that there are various ways to sort them. And here is the one that we are looking for. So I'm just going to pull it up really quick. And as it loads, you're going to see the image itself right here. And then below it down here is a toolbar that includes panning left, right, up and down, zooming in, zooming out, as well as maximizing. There is also a historical context below that we can see right here, as well as a button right here to turn off or on a typed transcript of the actual primary source text in the event that even after zooming in, students are unable to read it or maybe it's not legible. Familiarizing your students with this site and having them locate relevant primary sources for whatever lesson you're doing could definitely be incorporated into your lessons at any point during the year. The next segment of this lesson is for you to model your analysis of this document with your synchronous students. Depending on the unique strengths and needs of them, there are several ways you can do this. Students who you believe can independently read and analyze this document to find responses to these 3 prompts should be encouraged to do so, provided you are able to have them do some sort of check for understanding before moving on. From those who may benefit from you doing a think aloud model, you can pull them into a breakout room to do this. I would also recommend you share your screen as you do, just to ensure that they are seeing exactly the same thing you are, which is going to provide them with some additional visual support. After reading the document and the accompanying context, which I'm going to flip back to right now, continue your modeling by starting with identifying the type of document. After recognizing it as a congressional document, point out unique characteristics, such as the parts that are typed versus what is handwritten, and that it is signed by both the Speaker of the House of Representatives as well as the President of the Senate. Then, identify the date and authors, and if I was doing this with my students, I'd probably scroll down and use the transcript at this point. Think aloud as you speculate for whom it was written, its content, and why it was created. And importantly, put its aim and impact into plain language for the students. You can see here that I am highlighting, and as of this point in the DocsTeach app, you are not able to highlight on the image of the document itself. However, to support your students with visual guidance as you do your think aloud, you can highlight the text in the transcript using an app or an extension of your web browser. The one I'm using here is free and was easily found online. When your synchronous students reconvene, expand their thinking about this document as well as the connection it plays to the suffrage movement by having them respond to this prompt. As always, you can opt to have the students respond by typing their responses either in the chat or in a note-sharing slide or online discussion board, or you can have the students discuss verbally, either in small breakout rooms or as a whole class. As a segue for the upcoming DocsTeach activity, ask the entire class why an activity centered on women's suffrage would include a document that gave African American men the right to vote. After providing space for students to share their hypotheses with their peers, make sure you clarify that while the suffrage movement intensified following the 15th Amendment, the struggle for women's rights had already been in progress for decades prior. You can also use this opportunity to remind them of the Seneca Falls Convention, studied earlier in the unit, which did take place in 1848. Then, draw their attention to this slide, but before having them click on this link to begin the activity, there are two things you should do first. First, preview all the directions and expectations with them. Make sure that they understand that in addition to analyzing sources and putting them in the correct chronological order, they will also be compiling a list of arguments presented in the 11 sources, both for and against women's suffrage. And those are going to be entered on slide 13. Additionally, they should also note how each document indicates the various tools and techniques utilized by the suffrage movement. And second, take this opportunity to share your screen again and briefly navigate the activity for the students on DocsTeach, just to make sure that they are familiar with the layout of it. So you can show them that here are the 11 primary sources that they're going to look at, and down here is where they can drag them to when they want to put them in the proper sequence. Also, by clicking on this yellow icon, that's how the students can enlarge the document to be able to read it and look at the context and transcript that accompanies it. Once students are clear about the directions and expectations, they should be given sufficient time to do this. After they've completed the activity, students should discuss this prompt, which I recommend regardless of if you have the students respond verbally or via text, you find a way to record their responses and make it into a class list that the students can access and refer back to when they're answering the wrap-up question that follows. The lesson culminates with students demonstrating their ability to meet the lesson objective by applying their knowledge from the DocsTeach activity to these three prompts. In sum, these are some pretty meaty questions that the students should not only make claims about, but also support with relevant evidence, which they're probably going to pull from the T-chart that they made. So you definitely want to make sure that they have enough time to construct very thorough responses to these. There is one last modification you could do to increase student engagement as well as interaction with their peers if that is something you are looking to do. Since this second question is subjective, but there's only a limited number of possible answers presented in the documents, you may want to incorporate a poll into it. If you are using Zoom, you will have to set up ahead of time and populate it with arguments found in the documents. But I do think this is worthwhile because in my experience, polling students and making the results anonymously public to the class before they tackle a writing prompt can stimulate their thought processes, trigger student-to-student discussion as they question or challenge their peers, and also provide reinforcement and confidence to students who may worry that they might have selected the wrong one and are wary about writing and defending their claim.